Have you ever felt that life feels off-centered, out of balance? Particularly in this period of history, everything's been shaken up. It's a good chance to rethink the way we do a whole lot of things. It would be a shame to let a good crisis go to waste. They say astronauts in orbit experience the overall effect of seeing Earth without its borders and boundaries, and they gain this perspective on our world very few humans have ever experienced, and it affects them profoundly. With the benefit of divine inspiration, the Apostle Paul is able to give us a description of the overall effect of life from God's perspective, that Jesus Christ is actually the center of the universe and able to find balance in life. Everything and everyone needs to revolve around him. Paul addresses this idea, Jesus at the center, in a little Bible book called Colossians. Whether this idea is a reminder or a reinforcement or brand new information to you, you're going to benefit from reflecting on this truth. If for you, like the people of old, the place of Jesus had become less prominent and he is pushed more to the periphery of life rather than at the center, why not explore life from a different perspective? Hope you can join us either online or on site for Jesus at the Center.
Hi everyone, great to have you tuning in. This is a message that I really wanted to share, but I didn't expect to be doing it in this way, in this lounge room setting again, but we've made the decision to come and do purely online church for a while until the situation in Queensland calms down. So thanks for tuning in. As we saw in the intro, I think it's really significant that in this day and age that we keep Jesus at the centre. And there was some research done a couple of years ago by the Mark McCrindle Research Association looking at people's views of religion, spirituality and the different worldviews that they had on a whole range of things. And pretty much across the board there was a respect for Jesus. There was an honour of the morals that he had and how he stood for right and looked after people. So there's in one sense a fair deal of respect for Jesus, even from that sort of research. And even though you think, we should be happy with that people respect Jesus, I believe that's one of the subtle issues when it comes to this idea of Jesus at the centre. And the issue is that sometimes we can have a respect for Jesus without revering him. He's important, but he's just not the most important person or thing in the world. And therein it's only subtle, but there's a danger that we have that sort of approach with Jesus. He's sort of on a par with other gods. He's important in his own right, but has equal billing with other things. But as we see in this, particularly as we start off and have, I think, a look at really a foundational idea of who Jesus is, it's important to see the place that Jesus is given by this wonderful letter, the Apostle Paul, it was so inspired in what he writes. So we're just going to launch straight into it, and we'll dig into this passage in different ways. So this is from Colossians 1 from verse 15. This is what Paul writes. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before God made everything at all and is supreme over all creation. Christ is the one through whom God created everything in heaven and earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see. Kings, kingdoms, rulers and authorities. Everything has been created through him and for him. He existed before anything else began, and he holds all creation together. Christ is the head of the church, which is his body. He is the first of all who will rise from the dead. So he is first in everything. For God in all his fullness was pleased to live in Christ, and by him God reconciled everything to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of his blood on the cross. So that's a wonderful passage that Paul outlines the importance of who Jesus is. He's at the centre. And the way that he wants to convey that, it doesn't always come across as easily in English. But I first want you to notice just the structure and the way that Paul goes about explaining who Jesus is in this context. And sometimes if you want to get across a message that's so important, it's easy to do it in a way that's a bit cold, it's a bit clinical, it's a bit textbookish. This is a theological thesis. This is so important. But what you get, and the scholars recognise this, is you get a hymn, you get a poem. This is poetic. There is rhythm and rhyme in the original languages. It's a beautiful structured. It has a narrative like that. It's artistic. It portrays the truth of Jesus, but it does it in such a creative way. We don't always get it in the English. And I think this is an important lesson generally. As I said, even though Paul is trying to get across this great theological truth of who Jesus is, he's doing it in a creative way. And as intelligent as Paul was, and as the audacious claims that this actually makes about Jesus, it's done in a beautiful way. And I think it just shows in life in general. We need all sorts of people. In life, in the church, we need engineers and we need poets. We need practical people, down-to-earth people, and we need the dreamers. We need the artists as well as the down-to-earth people. We need the people who create beauty, but also can speak truth and are very hands-on in their approach. So I just think that's a good principle in life, the way that he structures it. I want to show another slide now, and it puts it in a slightly different way, similar, but I'll read it and then just look at it's more close to the original Greek in the way that it's structured. And I want you to notice the way that it does that. This is what it says. He is the image of God, the invisible one, firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created, in the heavens and here on earth, things we can see and the things we cannot. Thrones and lordships and rulers and powers, all were created both through him and for him. And he is a head prior to all else, and in him all things hold together. And he himself is supreme, the head over the body, the church. He is the start of it all, firstborn from the realms of the dead, so in all things he might be the chief. For in him all the fullness was glad to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself, making peace through his blood on the cross. Through him, yes, all things on earth and all things in heaven. Now as we keep that there, you see that there is different sections. Now first is a he is section that we've highlighted there. He is the image of God. He is ahead of all things, prior. He is himself is supreme, and he is the start of it all. And then we also have structured in that an in him section. In him all things were created. In him. Now we see the phrase through him. So all those mentions of the phrase through him are there. Through him, and the final one, yes, through him, all things in heaven and earth. So I just want you to see that initially, that it's the structure of that is done in a poetic way. And some people believe it is an early Christian hymn that Paul has borrowed with great truth. But another thing I want you to notice, and I'll share some of my bias here from my upbringing, from my growing up. I love, the dad jokes, the type of word puns, where there's a different word and it's used. I grew up with watching Fawlty Towers and the Two Ronnies, and loved the sort of humour that portrayed. So in Fawlty Towers, there's a man called Basil, and Manuel has a rat, he's called Basil, and then Basil escapes the rat, and he gets it in the ratatouille, and he thinks there, and then the chef says, I didn't put any basil in the ratatouille. And it's that sort of play on words where it means different things. And of course my two Ronnie's favourite skit was one called Four Candles. And if you've never seen that, do yourself a favour, just look up Two Ronnies, Four Candles. Of course this guy comes into the shop and he says 4 candles, so the guy gets him 4 candles, and the guy says no, fork handles. And it's just this play on words of how it's called a homophone, where a word can sound, or a phrase can sound the same as something else. And the humour or the interesting thing that that creates. And Paul does this. We don't always see it in the passage in a clear way, but he does this with another word, with the word head. Now, head can mean different things in our language as well. Head can mean the head of the river, or the head waters of the river. Head can mean the boss. He's the head of the company. He's the boss. He's the boss of it. Head can mean the first. You know, you've got a running race or something like that, and he heads the pack into the final straight. He's the first one. The same is true in the Greek language. And we don't always see it as we read this, but Paul plays with the word head to explain who Jesus is in this wonderful description. The first thing he says is that Jesus is the head of all the visible expressions of the invisible God. See, one of the issues with God is that he is invisible. He can't be seen. And that's an issue as we try to relate to him. So in Romans, Paul says, ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. But Paul is saying there that there are qualities of God that we can discover and can deduce as we look at creation. Sometimes we look at things and they're so beautiful or they're so powerful, and we start to question, what's behind that? Who must have made that? What must the person who made that be like? That there is beauty and majesty and power and order in the universe because God created it to be like that. The trouble is, of course, when it comes to those things in creation, sometimes the deductions that we have, the things that we work out about God may or may not be true. So we need a human form. And Paul says there in the letter to the Colossians that Jesus is the head of all the visible expressions of God. We can see it in other things in creation, but of all the things, Jesus is at the head of them. He is the best image of God that we have. In fact, we would say in our language, to use an S word that we're going to use, he is the spitting image of God. Jesus is the best portrait of God that we ever have been. If you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. All the personal characteristics, all the distinguishing marks of God are there existing in Jesus. Because no one has ever seen God, but Jesus is the best description of God, and Jesus makes him known in a way that nothing else and no one else ever could. So that first point is that Jesus is the head of the visible expressions of God. The second thing that Paul describes Jesus as is the head of all creation. In other words, he is the source in terms of that, the way we would use the head as the head of the river or the headwaters of the river. He is the one from which all creation has been made. He is the one through whom God made everything. He's not just part of this wonderful world that we see. Everything that is created has been made by way of him. And wherever you look, whatever you think about, and he does talk about all, but he gets more specific than that. Everything that we see and everything that we can't see. There's a whole lot of things happening in the spiritual world that sometimes we're not aware of, we are not cognizant to, but it's there. And whether they recognize it or not, whether they realize it or not, all of those things, the power structures of the universe, the kings and the kingdoms and the things in the spiritual world, everything owes their existence to God. And in fact, he holds it all together. If Jesus wasn't around, if he lost interest, if he went somewhere else, things would fly apart and fall apart. And I wonder sometimes if in the middle of this crisis, that's why we're having so much struggle sometimes, is because we're resisting, we're resenting, and we're rejecting the authority of Jesus on our lives. This is a wonderful quote from Bible scholar Tom Wright. He says this: "This isn't just a remarkable thing to say about an individual from recent history. It's a remarkable thing to say about the natural world. This was his idea, his workmanship. It is beautiful and powerful and sweet because he made it like that. When the lavish and generous beauty of the world makes you catch your breath, remember it's like that because of Jesus. So he is the source, he is the head of it all. Jesus heads all of creation, including the church, and we'll get to that in the coming weeks. The third thing Paul says and uses of the word head is he is ahead of everything. He is supreme. We might say, even another use of the word head, he is head and shoulders above everyone. In terms of rank, Jesus ranks higher than anyone. Anything in creation. And he is the head of the new creation. It talks there about Jesus rising from the dead and the new creation that's there. Now, other people rose from the dead. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. But what he's talking about there is a new way of rising, the resurrection body, the new thing that God is creating. Jesus is the head of that. He is surpassing all others in terms of spirituality, of superiority. Jesus is head and shoulders above everyone and everything. And again, another quote, I love this from Sam Storms. He says, we should resist the temptation to restrict the preeminence of Christ, that is the superiority of him, to just one day a week, as if he were Lord and worthy of praise for 1 hour on a Sunday morning. Resist the temptation to isolate the preeminence of Christ or reduce it just to religious matters. He has been given preeminence in all things. Everything in all of life, both inside and outside the church, exists to make him look good. Not to make him good, because he is eternally and self-sufficiently good, but to reveal and to disclose and to enable all to see that he is in fact good and gracious and worthy of our wholehearted and exclusive devotion. I struggle with even doing this as a message because I fail to do it justice. It is just so wonderful, this description of Jesus and all the different things of he is and the in him and through him, how he's the head of everything, the source. It really doesn't do it justice. And it almost strikes us as, in this day and age, in this world, as a bit funny because it's saying Jesus is so exclusive. We're in a world that everything, every point of view has to have equal say. And this really points out the exclusivity of Jesus. He is superior. He is not equal with other gods. He is not just one amongst other good people that lived. He is superior. He is better than all of them. He is the head of all of them. He is head and shoulders. He is uniquely, exclusively, anything above everyone. One of the great quotes about that comes from a guy called Abraham Kuyper. He lived in the Netherlands and was just one of these high achievers in life. He was a pastor, not only started his own church, but a whole denomination grew out of that. He was a journalist. He not only started a newspaper, but became editor-in-chief of the newspaper. He was worried about the political life in the Netherlands, and he started not only his own political party, but eventually he became Prime Minister of the Netherlands for 4 years until his death in the 1920s. So he's a capable and driven man. But it wasn't just about him. One of the quotes he said is this, I love this quote, he says, "No single piece of our world is sealed off from the rest. There is not a square inch in the whole domain of human existence over which Jesus Christ is sovereign, does not cry, mine." This is all Jesus's. This whole world is his because he made it, he holds it together, he reconciled it, he's bringing it towards his purpose. It is his because he made it and he holds it together. You've never seen anything in your life that God didn't create. He's upholding the very existence of our life now. He's preparing a better place for us into the future. He knows what's going on in this world. And he is the centre of the very universe. He's the destiny of every object you've ever seen. Anything you can't see and could imagine that exists in the world exists because Jesus made it that way. And he's the very centre of the universe. Now the trouble is, people don't live like that. As I said, we respect Jesus, we just don't put him at the very centre. And what I want to call for, and what I challenge you as you read this passage, as you think through it, is to have what's called in circles a Copernican revolution. And it comes from this idea of Nicholas Copernicus. Up until he lived, there was a few people that had different points of view, but most people believed that the earth was the centre of the universe and everything revolved around that. I mean, you look at the earth, you see the sun, it rises, it must be moving, therefore the earth must be the centre. But he came along and he was really the first to publish, and this is one of his pictures with the earth at the centre and everything else, the sun at the centre. He came up with the other idea that the sun is the centre of the solar system and everything revolves around that. Up until that time there was a different point of view that the earth was the centre, and that's the other picture that's there. But finally he came to this decision, he wrote the paper. The church wasn't as against it as you might hear sometimes, that the Catholic Church were against it, but anyway, we won't go into that for now. But there was this revolution as other people finally took his position, because the other idea with the earth at the centre didn't quite work. The revolution of the planets and everything, and if you look at that, I'm into astronomy, but it had some of the planets going around and then doing this dipsy-doodle here 360 degrees before it continued, because they couldn't make the model work. It just didn't tally up, so they had to make the other planets and other things do some strange circuits in order to make it work. And his ideas even were modified later on as he realised there was not an elliptic, not a circular pattern of orbit, but an elliptical one. And now we can demonstrate with quite a great degree of accuracy, and we know where the stars and the moon and everything is going to be because it's a different model. And the Copernican revolution has become a phrase that means for anything where we used to think a particular way and we change the way we think because of some new information. And I want to call, because of a passage like this and so many others about Jesus, for a Copernican revolution in our own lives. And what I mean by that is that we cease the understanding that life revolves around us, and we take on the understanding that life revolves around the Son of God. We're not the centre of the universe, Jesus is. Life does not revolve around us. We do not exist for God to bless us and that we're the centre and we expect life to move because of us. God is the centre of the universe and we exist for him. We exist to give him glory. And the quicker we do that, see, we can, if we think life revolves around us, we can make it work. There's people with the power of personality and the power of self-will and determination that can make life work. But things like this COVID-19 hit. Some personal crises hit. And when we think that we're the centre of the universe and life is not behaving like we want, we get out of balance. We get out of control. We resist and we reject the idea that Jesus has the authority, and it's really tough. And the best way to live is this understanding that Jesus is the centre, that we exist for him, we exist to make him look good, we exist to give him glory. And then we have to think through, as the people in Nicholas Copernicus's day, what are the implications of that? If Jesus is the centre, as we'll look at in coming weeks, what does that mean for our life? What does that mean for the church that I'm involved in? What does it mean for how I work? Sometimes some of these things, as we understand that Jesus is the centre, it might mean a radical departure from the way we're living. Sometimes with work it might just mean that we change who we work for. That we work for the boss, Jesus. that we work as unto him. And we need to work through the implications. If Jesus is the centre, what is it to please him? What is it to live with his will and his purposes rather than existing for ourselves? So I really want you to think through, continue to read the passage. I'll read and at the end from the Message version, and just ask you to consider, what does it mean for you to have that revolution, this radical change in understanding that life does not exist about you and for you, it's about Jesus. And what is it that you need to change to get that life under control where Jesus is at the centre? Let me read a passage from the Message in conclusion, and then we'll wrap up there for the day. This is that passage that I read earlier from Colossians 1 from the Message, and it says this: "We look at the sun and see the God who cannot be seen. We look at this sun and see God's original purpose in everything created. For everything, absolutely everything, above and below, visible and invisible, rank after rank of angels, everything got started in him and finds its purpose in him. He was there before any of it came into existence and holds it all together right up to this very moment. And when it comes to the church, he organises it and holds it together like a head does a body. He was supreme in the beginning, the head, and leading the resurrection parade. He's supreme, he's the head in the end. From beginning to end, he's there, towering far above everything and everyone, head and shoulders above them. So spacious is he, so roomy, that everything of God finds its proper place in him without crowding. Not only that, but all the broken and dislocated pieces of the universe, people and things and animals and atoms, get properly fixed and fit together in vibrant harmonies, all because of his death, his blood poured down from the cross." What a wonderful description of who Jesus is. And I just pray for you, whether you are a Christian, whether you're not a Christian, that you'll continue to be challenged to keep and to make and to keep Jesus at the very centre of your life. That you don't let things distract, that you don't just revere him, respect him, but not make him the most important thing in your life. And if you want to talk through, we'd love to talk with you here in Queensland. We look like we'll have some challenges ahead, but we'd love to talk with you and connect, just even though we've shut down our on-site services and pressed pause on them for a while. It doesn't mean that the church has shut down totally, and we can still connect with each other and help each other through this. So I thank you for listening today, and if you've got any questions, love to connect with you. My details are there, daryl@westsidechurchofchrist.org.au. I'd love you to connect in that way. So thanks for listening, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you again next week. God bless.